I tried. Okay. I was going to type it.
I said 47 years ago. There's another guess.
How did you come up with that number? I think it was one of
All right, so we're going to watch at least a good hunk of part 2 a little bit later on, but we're not quite there yet. Do I have everybody's? All right, good. Some of us were alive when that show was on. All right, so the video we watched yesterday, aka Friday. No, okay. What I'm going to do is that tomorrow, I'm going to quick look at them. So make sure you have your packet tomorrow. So give everyone a chance to finish up any parts. We should be through the election of 1860, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk through as we're doing the class. Just quick check. In fact, we're going to do a practice thesis statement tomorrow. So while you do that, I'll just quick check. And I'll give you a little credit for doing it. Just a little something, even though it's notes. I hope you like that video. I thought it's great. Last couple of years, we didn't watch it. And so I was really glad to show that again. I wanted to. So just make sure you have it tomorrow. So part 2 will begin after the election. And we're going to watch, not the whole thing, we'll watch part of it. And then next week, we will watch the Universal Battle, which is, I think, the 5th in the series. But that has Gettysburg, Vicksburg, I mean, so much happened in 1863. It's a really good one. And so let's go do your notes on. Let's go and finish up a little bit about slavery. Such a big deal, so important. A little touchy subject on a few of these things, but we have to get to them and talk about them. Also, did we get to proto-capitalism in here? Yes. Yeah, so tomorrow. Yeah, election of 1860. Who is it? What? The question is, what did the South do? That's when South Carolina started it. They seceded. Who became the first and only president of the Confederacy?
Jefferson Davis.
Yeah, Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis. It's a good video, but a little pro-South. We get proto-capitalism? Yeah. Do we get to the pushing system?
Yes.
Good. Do we get? Okay, good. So increased productivity right there. And the thing about it is that they did figure out a way to produce more. They figured out a way. And I always look at this picture. That was always my vision of slavery when I first heard about being a little kid. I first heard about this in kind of tame ways, when I was a kid. But like an overseer or whipping them to get them to work. No, that's not the way it worked at all. They had to figure out a way. The overseers would just sit back and watch. In fact, most of the time in the big plantations, the overseers would be other slaves. Usually ones that were kind of collaborating with the system, obviously. And the whole thing operated on terror coercion. Don't make your quota, you're beaten. That's the whole thing. It operated on terror. Slavery needs terror to function, which makes it so horrific. And so it would usually involve lashing, whipping. Here, this is actually a plate from Uncle Tom's Cabin. Here is from an anti-slavery journal, but he's being whipped, the paddle with the holes in it. And the other one would be torture positions. Can't make your quota. It would be like a stock like that, but just your feet up at a weird angle being held like that. It's one of those you think, oh, that wouldn't hurt too bad, but your feet's locked up at a weird angle. Hips and back hurts. It's just a nightmare. And so those would be used, yeah.
Why are there holes in the paddle? Are there holes?
Well, let me tell you, want to hear a story? No, you don't? Okay, moving on.
No.
Oh,
We need story.
it's a Monday.
Okay, I'll tell you my story. When I was in elementary school in Miles City, they still paddled students. And that was the norm. If you got in trouble, you were taken to the principal's office and you were paddled. And I can still vividly remember this. Not that I ever got in trouble, but I know others did. But our principal had 3 paddles on his hanging above his desk. One, I mean, this is true. And one paddle was just a thick piece of wood, just a paddle with a handle. Another one was another piece of wood about the same size with a big hole drilled into it, a big hole. And then another one like this with a bunch of little holes in it. And if you got in trouble, you got to pick your paddle. Huh? Which one's the worst?
The more holes.
One with the holes. Because because the air goes through the holes, there's less resistance, so they can go a lot faster. Now, I was framed one time.
That's what it all said.
There's a whole massive conspiracy, but I knew what paddle. The thing was, he did not. I mean, he still hit, so it's pretty bad looking back at it. But he didn't hit hard. It was more, he just kind of like tapped it. But it was like, oh, no, it's right. That's it. Should we do that now?
Yeah.
The next assembly. Moving on. So that's another whip and a paddle. The water torture was used a lot. That's a very elaborate box. With the water torture, they simulate drowning. Israel was doing this to prisoners in the 1980s, and that was against a treaty they had signed. The U.S. signed to against torture. So they started calling it waterboarding, so they wouldn't have the word torture in it. And yes, the U.S. would do that after 9/11. That's another story for down the road. This picture they showed in the video on Friday, he is a Union soldier. He had just volunteered, and the doctor in New Orleans took that picture. And so clearly what happened there is that that man refused to do his work. You will not make me do it. And he took a horrific beating. I can't even imagine that back. I mean, that's 100 lashes. That would kill. I mean, that could murder would kill someone today. And so that just gives you an example of a way of fighting back. But the whole thing operated with the threat of terror. And there'd be a lot of slaveholders who would say, I'm very benevolent. We rarely have to use the lash. They would say things like that. Jefferson Davis was a big one for that. Like Robert E. Lee's plantation used the lash all the time. We'll get back to Robert E. Lee's plantation. And also these other methods of torture, these would be bolted on their head, like this around their neck for running away or talking back. And it's heavy iron. So you can imagine how awful that would hurt. That is horrible torture. He clearly ran away. You can't run away, you can't go through a fence, can't go through a forest, you can't hide. So that's why. And it's just torture. That would be bolted on 24 hours a day. And you can't move it, to be a nightmare. She's wearing, this is belt bolted to her head, it's bells. Same deal to keep her from running away. These would be bolted to your wrists. You'd still be expected to meet your quota. Whatever the quota might be. That muzzle, same deal. Torture. You see someone like that and you will be very reluctant to run away or talk back. Yeah.
How long do they keep on?
Depends. It's just up to the whim of the master. So it could be a day, it could be a year, it could be for the rest of their life. And it would hurt. And that's the thing I want to make clear. It's not, oh, I'm wearing this awful cape. No, it would hurt really bad. So also on the slave, another insidious form of racism would be the division of labor on these plantations. Especially the big plantations where most of the slaves, most of the money was. So you have the field hands out in the field, and they're the ones quota, whipping, lashing all the time, operating on terror. And then the household help, not as many. This is actually from the turn of the century, but these are household help they're free, but they have been household help back when slaves, back 40 years earlier. So I thought that was a pretty good picture. And there was a real division of labor. And they worked their tail off, but not as bad as here. In fact, which group is going to be treated better, less lashing, things like that? Yeah, they're caring for the children. They're preparing your food. And they're the ones that you kind of closer by. It kind of makes sense. But there's something else. Which group had lighter colored skin? Household help. Why? Yeah, he's the father. So they're probably, they're related to the master or something to that effect. Remember Frederick Douglass, we saw in the video on Friday. His father was his master. And so they're going to be closer. They're really lighter colored skin. They call it either mulatto or yellow, which is yellow, yaller. I don't get why the way colors of skin happen a lot of the time, but lighter color. And sometimes they might say chestnut. And so they divide it. So they're treated a little bit better. They're closer to the family. Treated worse. Can't you see what kind of happened involving like racism? Wouldn't it be a kind of a push to start feeling you're a little better? Doesn't it seem to confirm racism? Lighter the colored skin, the better you're treated. So you must be a little better. They started dividing everything up, tiering by color of skin. And that's what happened in the plantations. The lighter the colored enslaved person was treated better. It was just happening because their household out, but that became the belief. Did everyone hear that? And that is going to go on for years afterwards. So within slavery, and then after slavery ended, still dividing people up by color of skin. Lighter color must be superior. It's that Bacon's Rebellion thinking now going to the plantation. So everything's divided by color of skin. Yeah, there's an obsession about color of skin in this era. I mean, there's still, obviously, people have different colored skins, and that's still there, but it's pretty insidious. So another thing about slavery was this concept of free will. So in that video we saw Friday, they had the interview with a former slave. She talked about how bad slavery was. She's another one singing that work song. Well, in those slave narratives, they were called. They talked about the torture, the terrible food, the awful conditions. But the part they hated the most was the lack of free will. The lack that you cannot as a person, make your own decisions. And I was trying to figure out how do you represent that? Now that the best way would be to be sold at any time. To be sold at any time. Almost every slave was sold at least once, sometimes multiple times. Families would be broken up, marriages would be broken up. Here's selling a mother from a child. Obviously dramatized, but there's a child right back there. I still find it interesting, the style of speech when they would say a likely and healthy young Negro wench. 10 as likely. I don't know how likely meant they are, but I just found that interesting the way they spoke back in the 19th century. And so you can be sold at any time, got to pay off a debt, boom, sell a human being. Now remember, the whole thing about the positive good theory was that they're civilizing the slaves. You're civilizing by selling their kids away when you need a little bit extra money. That proves, without a doubt, it was pure garbage. So these slave markets we're poking and prodding. I thought that was a really good picture in front. The slaves stripped naked and they're checking for whip marks. Does he meet his quota? That's what they're checking. This is stylized from Uncle Tom's Cabin with selling a baby. Rarely would they sell them that young, but they would sell 3 or 4, sure. And this is one, in the weird way they would draw Africans at this time. They put people of African descent in turbans for the picture. I don't know why. They just thought everyone in Africa wore turbans. And another part about this slave trade was the huge domestic slave trade. Hundreds of thousands of slaves would be driven south, especially from Virginia, where the tobacco plantations weren't doing as well, to a bunch of series of slave markets and slave brokers. These slave traders would ship them south on these sad, they're called coffees, and driven south. Now this is from the 1850s, and this picture always kind of makes me laugh, but it's supposed to be Washington, D.C., and it's supposed to be this country based on liberty, and yet here is a slave coffee going by Washington, D.C. That's supposed to be the U.S. Capitol. I know it doesn't look like it does, but it's the two houses. The rotunda they have on there now was actually started right before the Civil War. And so they just had a little rotunda, but this huge market. And this is the Slave Mart Museum in Charleston, South Carolina. So these brokers would clean up buying and selling slaves. And one of the most famous would be a guy by the name of Nathan Bedford Forrest. He'd become a millionaire at that time as the middleman buying and selling slaves. Just a repugnant person in many ways. But he would join the Confederacy and become probably the greatest cavalry leader in American history. Just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're a good person. So, one of the things about these slave plantations would be, therefore, to break the will of the slaves so they don't resist. And they had a term for this breaking. Actually, someone who was broke. Somebody who acted like a slave was supposed to. Submissive, here's the important thing. Acted dumb. Slaves are supposed to be inferior. And so they acted it. Yes, sir. No, sir. Allow them to laugh at them. Laugh at themselves. Do dumb things. Become kind of a clown almost. They called those things two names. Either cuffies or sandals. Yeah.
What was the name?
Coffle. Yeah. Let me make sure I know. Coffle. Coffle. I couldn't remember if it's EL or LE, so I had to go back and look. So, act submissive. Now, Sambo was a horrifically racist term. It was a slang that British would use when they came to the United States. But what it meant is somebody who had been broken or acted like a slave was supposed to, AKA like slavery and accepted. Cuff is giving someone the back of your hands. So they have been beaten into submission. So they've beaten out the negative parts of them, and now they're accepting slave and they like it. And they act like they're supposed to. Yes, sir, no, sir, do what they're supposed to do. And here's a household slave, and I thought this was a very fascinating picture. That's obviously the master's child. She's caring for him. That's a interesting picture, but acting submissive. Now, when I was a kid growing up, another kid story, wow, two today. 2 stores, you guys are so lucky. So there's a chain of restaurants all across the West. And it was just kind of bargain family dining kind of thing. When I was a little kid, when we travel, the few times we would travel, we would eat it. It was inexpensive. And I'm trying to find something close, but kind of like a Perkins or something like that. Danny, something, just, And it was called Sambo's. And Sambo's was this term for a slave who had been broken. It was a kind of a mocking to make fun of him. And there's this British poem called Little Boy Sambo and all this. And they had pictures of it up, and he's all over it. And this is in the 60s and 70s, 1960s and 70s. And it just blows my mind that that's the name of a restaurant. And then overnight they were gone. Just that's do you realize what the name you're using? And so when we were in Billings last time we were going home for Thanksgiving, we drove right by. My wife and I drove right by where the Sambo's was in Billings. It was just so amazing to me. But it also could be used as a way of passive resistance. Resistance. Act the way you're supposed to act. Act the way that you have been broken. You have been broken. And here's a cartoon after the Civil War. but this would be used as a derogatory, mocking term for freedmen or African Americans, those who have been enslaved. And the cartoon is shocking, this horrific caricature, and drawing these characteristics, trying to make them look. Remember that picture I showed you where they compared the skulls of Africans to chimpanzees, same kind of deal, horrifically racist, right here. And he is saying, "Say, Sambo, don't you think this piece of watermelon is rather large? This is golly boss, that ain't half big enough." We're supposed to be laughing, not at this person, but the fact that they are black and therefore inferior. It's shocking, grudges, and this was the casual racism that was everywhere. And what about somebody who wasn't broke? The one they were scared of, the ones that were dangerous. What was the name for that? Say it, but I'll show you an ad from the turn of the century. Oh, let's get to this real quick. So what we're talking about here are racial slurs. Racial slurs. And these are used not as individual people, but to differentiate people by groups, by what they are, what they believe, etc. And these are stereotypes. Stereotypes, therefore you can categorize people before you ever know anything about them, or dismiss what they are because of they're a member of this group. Basically, the groups could be usually, color of skin, and they're trying to divide everyone by color of skin. Or religion, class. And I put this picture up here because that is an example of an Irish, I've showed you pictures like this before. An Irish immigrant to the United States using Irish prejudice, which came from Britain, and Britain used it because they destroyed Ireland, and they justified, said they're not really human, and implying they're violent, they're drunkards, and therefore they're not individuals, they're just the Irish, or whoever they might be. And the big thing about that is, it's like subconscious. You want to just get people not even to think about it, start just dividing people up. Stereotypes are really dangerous. And all of us are susceptible to not even thinking about it, just start dividing people up. We'll see the same thing when it comes to sex between men and women. But I'll show you some things in the 1950s about ads where they would stereotype women. And it was shocking, but it was meant to be funny. Women. It was just really kind of amazing. We'll get to that obviously in April. But speaking of stereotypes, a Sambo or a Cuppy was somebody who had been broken. Somebody who was dangerous and had been broken. That's that. And that is from a bank to mock them. That's where that word comes from. That it's somebody on the slave, and it's meant to be dangerous. Dangerous, uncivilized. This is a massive insult. So that word is just simply used as somebody who is below. And it's going to be for anybody of darker color skin when the United States is going to conquer the Philippines. We have a massive war called the Philippine Insurrection. That's what American soldiers call the Filipinos. That word. Watch, darker colored skin is way just to pigeonhole people. And this is actually one of those metal banks. And this is what made me think of it. They had all these little metal toys you would wind up. This is one of the little toys. You'd wind up and it'd do things. I had a bank that was like this, but it was a cat. But this one was, it's just shocking how the casual racism, but you would put a coin in the hand, turn the crank, and the hand would drop the coin in the mouth and go into the bank. That's all it was. But here, using all the characteristics, or the stereotypes, and we're supposed to laugh at them. This is just casual, just everywhere, this kind of racism, where people just don't even think about it. So, how would slaves resist? Slaves would resist all the time. Sabotage would be one of the biggest. Break stuff. Think about on a farm. Picking crops, growing crops, all the things to break. And remember, slaves are supposed to be dumb. So aren't they going to make mistakes? I had no idea you weren't supposed to dump all the seeds into the river. We're not supposed to break our shovels? Who knew that horses need shoes on all four hooves? No one told me that. You mean when I'm cooking soup, I'm not supposed to urinate in it? I'm blown away. Oh yeah, they would do that. Don't do this. But what a way to fight back. And do other stuff to the food. You're preparing it. I had no idea you weren't supposed to do it. Oh, sure, you might get beaten a little bit, but they're supposed to act dumb. And that's that strange little balancing act. They're supposed to act dumb. If they get punished too much, they might run away. That's what happened to Frederick Douglass. And, oh, almost forgot. One more thing about slavery. Almost forgot something. This is why slavery doesn't work in factories. Think about all the stuff to break in the factories. Think about all the gears. In World War II, Germany would enslave millions of people from areas they conquered. Kidnap them, bring them back to Germany as slave laborers. They worked in the factories, etc. More and more German men went to war, and Nazi ideology didn't want women to work in the factories as much. And they worked, and they fought back. They risked torture and death to sabotage German equipment. And it was decisive in the war effort. German equipment in World War II was notoriously unreliable, breaking down all the time. And a lot of it had to do with slave laborers fighting back. German tanks were infamous for just squeaking, screeching as they went, because a big thing they would do is not put the ball bearings into the wheel. If you don't have, in the wheelbase, if you don't have ball bearings, it's metal against metal. And you can't tell when the wheel is assembled if the ball bearings are there. So it just doesn't work very well. So spirituals would be a way to fight back. So they would be forcibly converted through Christianity. And once again, they would act like puppies and act like, yes, we're accepting this. But the songs they would sing, which the masters would kind of mock, but they had a deep inner meaning. Look at the words. What's it talking about? Running away. We got to get away from this. We'll get away. We're going to get away. It's a very subtle but effective way to fight back. But then I didn't write down run away, but one of the biggest ways would be to actually run away, which you're risking a lot. You'd have to run away, and there would be slave patrols, because look at the rewards. So this is in the 19th century. Look by the 1850. Multiply that by 20, and you got what the reward is in today's dollars. And that's big money. And so there'd be slave patrols would roam looking for anybody they could capture and try to sell into slavery. And heck, if they have to, they'll capture free people and bring them back. Yeah, they would do this all the time. Go kidnap free people and then sell them back, capture the reward. Heck, the owners didn't care. Just give me a person. And or sell them into slavery. And so just deprive the owners of that work. Now, the thing was, sometimes they would just go hide. If, let's say, think about it. You're downriver. You're in the Black Belt region here, and you're in Alabama. Where do you go? How do you get out of here? So sometimes they might just go hide for 1 or 2 days. Oh, sure, they know they're going to get beaten. You didn't get my work for these 2 days. I showed you. I'm still myself. That's free will. I'll take it. I don't know if I'm tough enough. There's everyone think, yeah, I could do that. I don't know. But then again, I've never gone through anything like that. Now, the Underground Railroad would be at first relatively informal, would become more and more advanced. Guides, safe houses, to try to usher, to bring people up north. Conductors would sneak down south and bring back runaway slaves. Here's escaping one of the slave patrols. Henry Box Brown would be famous because he shipped himself north in a box through the U.S. mail. And so that was an example of running away. He became a famous story. I just love this picture, so I had to show you this. So here he is. He's about a week and a half. He's in this box. But he got to Massachusetts, and he was free. And I just like he's jumping out like after a week and a half in a box in a suit. I'm fine. I don't think he'd look like that. So the Underground Railroad. So the big thing is along the mountains or along water, they could be smuggled on the ship. So like harbors like New Orleans or Savannah would be big areas for the Underground Railroad, or up the Mississippi River. And then get out of this area either to here or up to Canada. So how old were you guys when you first heard about the Underground Railroad? Do you remember? In elementary school, probably. Now, who first heard about this and had this vision of like tunnels with big trains going on? Yeah, I did. I was so disappointed to find out it wasn't trains. I really thought there'd be like these massive underground trains. That's a shame, but it's still pretty amazing. Here, Harriet Tubman was probably the most famous conductor. Sojourner Truth, also, Sojourner Truth is amazing. A tireless fighter for equal rights, women's rights. She was involved in this weird cult. I'll finish the rest of this tomorrow. Make sure we have the answers to the questions from the college. I'm going to give a few points.
I know, I'm running out.
It's called the Cult of the Tales. Yeah. It was a wild one. But it was more like she was. She was one. She was the servant. But she was in it. I have me alone. We're not limboing, everybody.
Okay, so I want to tell you something. So my grandpa was
1 month. We only get 1 month to do limbo.
like that. And